Hello everyone, this is Alexei Voronin with Global Vector, your go-to source for sharp, unfiltered geopolitical analysis. If you're hooked on real insights that cut through the noise, smash that like button, subscribe right now, and ring the bell so you never miss an update. Today we're plunging into a seismic shift in global power dynamics, why the United States is pivoting its focus from the grinding conflict in Ukraine to the rising giant in the East China. Buckle up, because this isn't just a policy tweak, it's a remake of the world order that could redefine alliances, economies, and even the risk of World War III. Let's dive in. Picture this. It's February 24th, 2022. Russian tanks roll across the Ukrainian border, igniting the largest European land war since World War II.
The United States, under President Joe Biden, rallies the West, pouring in over $175 billion in aid. By the end of 2024, military hardware, intelligence,
and economic lifelines that keep Kyiv fighting. Fast forward to January 25th, 2026, and the script flips. With Donald Trump back in the White House, the Pentagon unveils its 2026 National Defense Strategy, a 34-page blueprint that demotes Europe to a persistent but manageable threat and elevates deterring China in the Indo-Pacific to mission-critical status. Why the turnaround? Is it fatigue from a proxy war that's drained trillions globally? Or a cold calculation that Beijing, not Moscow, poses the existential challenge to American hegemony? We're breaking it all down fact by fact, implication by implication to give you the full picture. First, let's set the stage with the historical context. The United States post-Cold War era has been defined by global primacy, a doctrine where Washington acts as the world's policeman, from the sands of Iraq to the mountains of Afghanistan. But the invasion of Ukraine exposed cracks in that facade. By mid-2025, U.S. aid to Ukraine had surpassed $180 billion, according to the Council on Foreign Relations, fueling everything from Javelin missiles to Patriot air defense systems. Yet, the war dragged on. Russian advances in Donbass, Ukrainian counteroffensives in Kherson turning into a brutal stalemate. Casualties mounted, over 500,000 combined dead or wounded, per estimates from the United Nations and independent analysts like the Oryx database. Economically, it hammered the West. Inflation spiked due to energy shocks, with European gas prices tripling in 2022 alone.
Meanwhile, across the Pacific, China was quietly amassing power.
Under President Xi Jinping, Beijing's military budget ballooned to $296 billion in 2025. Per the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, second only to the US's $886 billion. The People's Liberation Army modernized rapidly. Hypersonic missiles like the DF-17, carrier fleets expanding to 3 operational groups, and aggressive island building in the South China Sea, claiming 90% of those waters, despite international rulings against it, in 2016 by the Permanent Court of Arbitration. Taiwan loomed as the flashpoint. Polls from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs in 2025 showed 72% of Americans viewing China as a critical threat, up from 48% in 2018. Why? Because a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could disrupt global semiconductor supply chains. Taiwan produces 63% of the world's chips per TSMC data, crashing economies from Silicon Valley to Seoul. This duality entanglement in Europe versus the brewing storm in Asia forced a reckoning.
Enter the 2026 National Defense Strategy, released on January 23rd by the newly renamed Department of War under Secretary Pete Hegseth. Signed off by President Trump, it declares, defending the U.S. homeland is the foremost priority. That means fortifying borders against narco-terrorists in the Western Hemisphere, securing assets like the Panama Canal and Greenland, and building a Golden Dome anti-drone system. Europe, it's downgraded. The strategy labels Russia a persistent threat but insists NATO allies take the lead on Ukraine, meeting a new 5% of GDP defense spending threshold, 3.5% on core military, 1.5% on security. US support? More limited, calibrated to American interests. As the document states, we must and will prioritize defending the US homeland and deterring China, while remaining engaged in Europe but delegating primary responsibility to allies. Why this pivot now? Reason 1. Resource scarcity. The US military can't fight everywhere at once.
The 2022 National Defense Strategy under Biden called China the pacing challenge. But by 2025, simultaneous threats overwhelmed planning. A Rand Corporation report from October 2025 warned that a two-front war, Ukraine draining munitions while prepping for Taiwan, could exhaust U.S. stockpiles in weeks. Javelin missiles? Ukraine fired thousands. Replenishing took years. Artillery shells? The U.S. ramped production to 90,000 per month by late 2025, but it still lagged Russia's 100,000-plus output, bolstered by North Korean supplies. Trump's team calculated and the Ukraine drain to stockpile for China. As political analyst Numan Abuisa noted in a January 2026 interview, the U.S. eyes ending the war to shift Russia from China's orbit, weakening the Sino-Russian axis formalized in their no-limits partnership of February 2022. Reason 2. The China-Russia nexus. Ukraine didn't just bog down Russia, it supercharged Beijing-Moscow ties. China provided dual-use tech drones, optics, microchips, evading sanctions, per a 2025 U.S. State Department report. Trade surged. Sino-Russian bilateral volume hit $240 billion in 2025, up 30% from pre-war levels. Russia became China's top oil supplier, shipping 107 million tons annually. And emboldened Russia, if victorious in Ukraine, could free up resources to support China elsewhere, perhaps in the Arctic or Central Asia. Conversely, a prolonged Ukraine war ties down Putin, but at U.S. expense. The Atlantic Council's December 2025 analysis warned an unjust peace in Ukraine favoring Russia could embolden China to take military action of its own, say against Taiwan. Trump's push for peace via threats of arming Ukraine more if Russia doesn't negotiate, as he hinted in a December 2024 interview, aims to peel Moscow away from Beijing. Why? Russia needs Western markets. Sanctions have shrunk its GDP by 2.1% in 2025 per IMF data. A deal could lift those, isolating China. Reason 3. Economic imperatives. China's rise isn't just military, it's existential. By 2026, China's GDP stands at $18.5 trillion, closing in on the U.S.'s $26 trillion per World Bank projections. Tech wars rage, Huawei's 5G dominance, TikTok's data hoarding, and EV giants like BYD outselling Tesla globally. The U.S. CHIPS Act of 2022 funneled $52 billion to domestic semiconductors, but Taiwan remains vulnerable. A Taiwan conflict could cost the global economy $5 trillion, 10% of GDP, per a Bloomberg economics model from January 2023. Ukraine aid, meanwhile, competes with domestic priorities. Trump's America First mantra resonates. Why spend billions abroad when borders are porous? A Pew Research poll in November 2025 showed 57% of Americans favoring reduced Ukraine aid to focus on Asia. Reason 4. Alliance dynamics. The new strategy demands greater ally burden sharing. Europe, with a combined GDP of $19 trillion, must step up. Germany hit 2% GDP defense spending in 2024, but others lag. The U.S. has shouldered 70% of NATO's budget historically. Now, with limited support pledged, allies like Poland and the Baltics are ramping up. Poland's defense budget hit 4.1% in 2025. In Asia, it's different. Allies like Japan, Australia, and the Philippines are eager partners against China. Japan's 2025 defense hike to 2% GDP includes Tomahawk missiles. The AUKUS-packed nuclear subs for Australia strengthens deterrence. Shifting from Ukraine frees U.S. assets, carrier groups from the Mediterranean to the Taiwan Strait, F-35 squadrons from Europe to Guam. But this pivot isn't without risks. Critics argue it signals weakness. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, in a January 2026 address, warned that reduced U.S. aid could lead to territorial concessions, emboldening autocrats. European leaders fret. French President Emmanuel Macron called for strategic autonomy in a December 2025 speech, fearing U.S. retreat. China? Beijing views it as opportunity. A Brookings Institution analysis from January 2026 notes Chinese analysts see the U.S. shift as reflecting domestic political dynamics and resource constraints, potentially overextending America. Elsewhere, If Russia secures gains in Ukraine, say annexing Donetsk and Luhansk, she might greenlight Taiwan ops, calculating divided US attention. Geopolitically, this realigns the board. The axis of necessity, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, deepens. Iran drones Ukraine while arming Houthis. North Korea ships artillery to Russia, getting missile tech in return. A US pivot could fracture this. Negotiate with Putin, isolate Xi. But failure risks escalation. Simulations from the Center for a New American Security in 2025 project a Taiwan war, costing the US fleet 30% losses in months. Nuclear shadows loom. China's arsenal grew to 500 warheads by 2025 per the Arms Control Association. Domestically, it's polarizing. Republicans hail it as pragmatic. Democrats decry abandonment of values. A CNN poll in January 2026 shows 51% support prioritizing China over Ukraine, but 43% fear it betrays allies. Economically, wins include onshoring. The Inflation Reduction Act's $400 billion in green tech draws firms from China. But tariffs, Trump's proposed 60% on Chinese goods, could spike inflation. In conclusion, the US shift from Ukraine to China is a calculated gamble. Drain the European swamp to fortify the Pacific Wall. It's driven by finite resources, a tightening Russia-China embrace, economic stakes, and alliance reforms. Will it deter Beijing or invite aggression? Time will tell. But one thing's clear, the era of unlimited US intervention is over. Power is redistributing, and the next chess move could be anyone's. Thanks for watching Global Vector. This is Alexei Voronin signing off. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What do you think of this pivot? Like, share, subscribe for more. See you next time.